Beyond money, why capabilities and economic mobility can measure and define poverty more holistically. Paolo Genicio and Navid Haider. Poverty is a complex and intricate subject. While there are many different definitions and measures of poverty, we believe that poverty is a state where individuals do not have adequate resources to access some basic amenities and capabilities in life. Therefore, we advocate that poverty should be preferably measured based on hierarchical central combined capabilities, freedom of choice, and economic mobility. If you ask a random Joe or Jane along the road what poverty is, chances are homeless, lack of food and drink, unemployed, lazy, penniless are the responses you will likely receive. A prominent theme amongst these is the idea that poverty is income lowness or a simple inadequacy. But is poverty really just a lack of money? Well, this is exactly the means of how the US measures poverty, though. The US uses the OPM, or the Official Poverty Measurement. This measure uses money, specifically gross annual pre-tax income, compared to an absolute threshold to ascertain whether an individual is in poverty or not. This threshold is determined by 3 times the price of a thrifty but nutritional food basket and adjusted for family size, inflation, and the CPI. The threshold is absolute, meaning that it is fixed and does not adjust with changes in the standard of living. While the OPM is easy to measure, it ignores other factors which may either boost one's income, such as in kind benefits like Social Security, nutritional programs, and earned income tax credit, or decrease income through non discretionary expenses like paying for childcare services or one daily commute. It also fails to show depth as it is a binary measure. Either you are in poverty or are not. Say, if John is $1 above the threshold, is he really that much better and safe from poverty? Additionally, isn't there a big difference if Joe earns a few dollars below the threshold compared to Jane, who has an income thousands less and is thus in extreme poverty? To minimize these existing flaws, the SPM, or Supplemental Poverty Measure, was birthed in 2011, where these in kind benefits and critical expenses are included in the calculation amongst other proponents. It's formulated using the 33rd percentile of consumer spending on the basic necessities of FCSU: food, clothing, shelter, and utilities with 2 children, then multiplied by 1.2. It is more suited to the modern day, but material adequacy does not guarantee a stable life free from poverty. Take the example of world renowned author Dorothy Allison. While she grew up in the presence of those basic necessities, she was sexually abused, was lesbian, and seen by society as white trash and expected not to finish school. Despite her having all these amenities, as Rector, an author critical of labeling these people impoverished, would put it, she struggled immensely to lift herself from the intersectionality imposed on her. What, then, would be a more holistic definition of poverty? Remember the number 1.2? This number is arguably the best feature of SDSVM as it allows for personal spending. This recognizes that human life is more than mere existing and metabolizing. One's quality of life, which we are ultimately concerned with, needs to be enriched and safeguarded as well. It respects freedom of choice and empowers individuals by acknowledging their dignity and basic human capability to decide for themselves.
We want to measure poverty through capabilities rather than measuring it through a fixed income or the functioning of an individual. Functioning can be defined as the doings and beings of an individual or what he achieves to stay out of poverty. On the other hand, capability refers to a potential range of functionings a person can achieve, assuming the system gives them the opportunity to do so. Now, let's say hi to John, who has a good job, has enough money, and he loves to travel outside the US. Now, this act of John traveling abroad can be defined as a functioning. But then the government comes up and says, hey, the passport control won't let you go outside US. So you really cannot travel. This is an example of capability. Even if John has some assets to him which he can use, he doesn't have the capability or the opportunity to go outside. Traditional measurement of poverty, like OPM, has always focused too much on functionings. But why is that problematic? Individuals can vary vastly on their potential to utilize the resources around them. For example, John cannot make the best out of school because he's disabled and cannot attend school. So it is unfair if we base our estimate of poverty on his inherent physical limitations, which we cannot solve. Policymakers just might think that the education system is at fault here, so there could be misallocation of resources. On the other hand, Jim is smart, but he actively chooses not to make the best out of school. This estimate is comparatively fairer because we know that Jim is making an active choice and therefore it's not a fault of the system. A measure of poverty based only on individual functionings and limitations, like John's, cannot produce the best estimate of poverty, whereas a measurement of capabilities, like Jim's, can help us pinpoint the problem better and make accurate and solid policies. Let's take a look at an example of how policies can be influenced through our capability approach. In case of John, the government can realize that there is a problem with the system and not with John's disability. So they can build a school for the disabled in his area, which means that John gets to have a good education and actually go to a school. Now, if John chooses to deny this service, that's absolutely justified. Capability approach makes sure that we respect a person's freedom of choice. But why is that important? Eminent economist and Nobel laureate Amartya Sen thinks that you empower human beings when they're given their due rights. Human beings are multidimensional in nature. Every human being has different expectations and hopes in life. Welfare to them is subjective. What is welfare to one person is not welfare to the other. That's why human beings should be able to achieve outcomes that they value and have reason to value, and should be given the freedom to pursue those. If John thinks that education is not the best for him, he should have the right to not pursue it. But the system should still make sure that if he does wish to pursue education, there's a proper school out there for him to enroll in. Another philosopher, Nussbaum, gives us a list of 10 central capabilities that she thinks is essential to human dignity. She thinks that these capabilities should act as a parameter for us to understand whether a person is suffering from poverty or not. As a team, we agree with Nussbaum's central list of capabilities, but we have made our own hierarchical list of central capabilities where we have prioritized some capabilities over another. For example, we think life is the most prioritized capability that we can think of, which can give rise to other capabilities. Some capabilities, like affiliation, when used as a function, can give rise to other capabilities. For example, if you have the right to affiliate with your neighbors, it can give rise to other capabilities like having emotional connections with the people around you, or for example, playing in the playground with your peers.
Sen and Nussbaum's capabilities and poverty argument can further be supplemented by the concept of economic mobility. The inclusion of economic mobility recognizes that poverty is cyclical and intergenerational. The external circumstances that led one to be poor are likely to persist and manifest itself in the succeeding generation. Economic mobility allows us to infer a community or country's opportunities and possible subsequent capabilities therefrom, and observe how the distribution of percentages are. It secondly relates both to the capability and monetary approach, as one's economic mobility is determined by a combination of both social and economic factors such as income, highest degree of educational attainment, social stigmas, inequality of access, and cultural norms. This approach is therefore a compromise between the quantitative and qualitative measures of poverty. A country with equal opportunities would have exactly 20% in each quintile. Having said all this approach suffers from the same problem as the OPM and SPM does: depth. However, if we use deciles instead of quintiles, Movement between these would be more accurately captured. Further, this number is calculated when both parents and children are in their 30s to 40s, which may not be desirable as one's economic mobility can still change later on in life.
Let's switch over to Robert Rector for a moment. He thinks that poverty in America is overrated. Is it really? Rector's first argument claims that the poorest Americans today live a better life than the richest in the society used to do about 100 years ago. He doesn't consider the fact that living standard of Americans have also increased tenfold in a span of 100 years. The economy has developed with time and we have seen massive improvements in health and welfare. Furthermore, his comparison of poor people with the poor people of other countries is wrong because America's social contexts and developments are very unique. Rector also talks about how poor Americans have too much unnecessary commodities which are not seen in other poor societies. There might be a few reasons for it. Most of America's poor are in what we call transitional poverty. So a poor person might have acquired or owned a fridge before he was poor, and after he's poor, he cannot simply get rid of it. Rector accuses the American poor of having expensive commodities like a mobile phone, but he doesn't understand that the price margins of a phone has drastically reduced over time. It's not as expensive for anyone to get a phone as it was a decade ago. We need to approach Rector's arguments in terms of capability and ask some very important questions. Does the poor have the capability to fix the washing machine? Do they have enough money to fix that? Or how old is the TV? Maybe they bought the TV second hand. It's very old and consumes a lot of electricity. So it's not as new as Rector thinks it is. Or for example, should air conditioning be a basic human right? Because of global climate change, the temperature around you is always increasing. It's very hot and humid. As a human being, do you have the right to remain in a cool environment which is congenial for your health? These are the questions we need to consider while dealing with Rector's arguments. Although we agree with some of Rector's arguments, he talks about how media gives an inaccurate picture of poverty by only emphasizing on extreme scenarios. We accept the fact that maybe 1 in 7 Americans are poor but not homeless. But the thing is, that does not mean we stop caring about them. Although the number of homeless people are low in estimates in comparison, it's still a significant number of people that we need to take care of.
In sum, the capabilities approach supplemented by economic mobility is our preferred system of measurement as it considers the quality of life and the broader effects of social factors and opportunities on one's capability beyond money.